Your free will is an illusion, providing that God is all-knowing, the past, present, and future. It's like movie over and the all-knowing plot. So this argument has been made forever, is that it's an illusion of free will. It's actually the opposite, really. So I understand where your argument is, okay? And it's this idea that, well, God knows what you're going to do. So how is it free will? Well, just like AI predicts things, God's the ultimate predictor. God knows that if you don't surrender your free will to him, he knows, he predicts what you're going to do. He doesn't interfere, but he knows what you're going to do. It doesn't mean he's laid out the plan. You're still given free will, but he knows, because he's the best predictor, what you will do. He also knows that if you surrender your free will to him and you let him guide you, then of course he knows that if I'm guiding you, then I know what you'll do too. But it's still all your free will. The part nobody has figured out, I guess, because man doesn't want to, is that Jesus came to show you that he didn't. There's a reason the Pharisees weren't going to be okay with Jesus, because he didn't want to do anything about the government. He didn't take part in it. Jesus came and he rarely talked about it. And he never surrendered to the government, but he surrendered to God. That's what he did every step of the way. The churches and every Christian in the world has no way around this. They don't. But every Christian, because of the churches, because of scholars, because of people that really have just wanted to run on their own free will rather than truly know God, and they all just look like Pharisees, has failed to realize the most simplest part. And I wouldn't expect scholars to get it, because they look for this complicated, answer to everything. No, there's nothing complicated here. Which is why Jesus didn't go to the higher educated, because he knew they would complicate it. He knew they wouldn't do his will. The Pharisees were the higher educated. Every single one of the 12 apostles that Jesus picked, not one of them was higher educated. Now they'll say, but Luke was a doctor. Luke wasn't one of the 12 Jesus picked. I know it's a gospel, but he came later. So did Mark. The only people in the New Testament that were of, some of the, the few that were handpicked by Jesus was John, Peter, and Matthew. People would say, but Paul never knew Jesus personally, and he was a former Pharisee. I'm not saying to disregard, but God is going to use Paul as a stumbling block to catch the modern day Pharisees. Because there's things that Paul wrote, and I think Jesus wanted it this way, because I don't tell people to disregard Paul, because there's too much of his writing that is dead on with God. But you have to seek God to know that. But God will use those parts that totally conflict with what Jesus did as a stumbling block. Again, just like Jesus was a stumbling block for the Jews, or for the Pharisees. Because in the Old Testament, it said that anybody hung on a tree was cursed. And so when you just follow the text, and you don't ever seek God for the answers, then you end up like the Pharisees. Oh, no, we put everything on just the written text, but we don't ever seek God or know God. And they didn't know God, and they proved that to Jesus, which is why Jesus condemned them. Same thing. That's what you can never say it over and over again. Never, ever can you place something that Paul says over what Jesus says. But every church has done it. And again, I'm saying there's just those certain parts that should have stood out to some church along the way. That, wait a minute, this goes totally against what Jesus did. But there's not one church that teaches Jesus' word. They've complicated it. The Catholic Church being the biggest, but they were never about Jesus to begin with. They were just the Roman Empire that said, we're going to become the church now. And we're just going to wield our ugliness and control kings all through Europe. And it's just led to all this nightmare. It's really simple. It's the free will that has been the problem since day one. And God doesn't want to take your free will, because he wouldn't be God if he didn't give you free will. He just has been waiting, and it will happen eventually. Eventually there'll be a generation that gets it, that will exercise their free will and surrender it to God, realizing, wait a minute, for 7,000 years, people have been trying to set up their countries, their kingdoms, their empires, their continents, their islands, all to, in the West anyway, to represent God, or to, mirror, some of what, it seems that God wants. And Jesus came to show you, no, stop doing it. Stop. Am I here doing anything with the government? No, I am here surrendering to God. I wanted you to walk exactly like I do. I wanted you to completely surrender to me and then wait and follow my lead. That's what I want, because that's what they had to do in Exodus. Why? Because you exercised free will, and when man exercised that first free will with the original sin, they became spiritually dead. And so God's been working patiently, lovingly, over many generations, 7,000 years, if maybe longer, waiting for the generation, and he knows what generation will get it. We don't, but he's the best predictor. He knows that eventually people will look back and say, wait a minute, everybody's tried everything. So why is the Prince of Darkness still running this kingdom? We should have accountability. We have this great country. We have all set up, all beautiful. God does inspire some of it, and it all goes off the rails, doesn't it? Really quickly, usually. Because the prince of the power of the air is who Jesus said controls this world. And then I guess no church in the world, no Christian church ever sat back and said, but why? Why, God? Why? If you overcame it all with Jesus, why? Why is the Prince of Darkness still running this kingdom, running this world? Because you've chosen him. You've exercised your free will, not to do it the way Jesus showed you to do it, but to do it the way you want to do it, which was the very problem at the very beginning. Yet prior to the original sin, they had free will, and they needed to follow God. That was what they needed to do. Why would that be any different now? It isn't. So God knows. I look out at the landscape of the earth and I see, no, everybody's just doing their own free will. So yes, when you just operate on your own free will and you think you're doing my will, but you don't surrender your will to me, then you are going to get the Prince of Darkness, because that's what your free will has chosen. When you decide that you want to surrender your free will, something that a generation at some point will get, but nobody has yet, then I will lift the curse. What Jesus came and got rid of the curse, but man was the curse. Man's free will. So to get back into the kingdom of God's, and I'm talking about in life, because we're talking about when they were alive in the garden. To get back there, to get back under that system, you have to surrender your free will to be navigated out. And then once back there, then you will have a better understanding that, okay, now we know, we only will follow what God says. If he says not to take from this tree, we're not going to take it. If he says don't do this, we're not going to do it. But we have to start before we can even get there. We have to start by completely surrendering to him. Because he is the only answer. He is the only answer. No government is the answer. No country is the answer. It is all the same thing, some better than others. But ultimately, God waiting for the people to get wise enough to realize your free will is the problem in the fallen world.